Hello,
Hi.
and
Hello.
welcome to another episode of In Dialogue. And today, um, Fritz and I are here with Fatim. It's so nice to have you here, Fatim. You and I actually did our grad together
Yes.
in mental health counseling, and that's how
Yep.
we know each other.
Yeah.
And you are a licensed therapist, and
Yep.
you are also in career development. So can you
hmm
think a little bit about, are you in private practice right now and what your interests are?
Yeah. Yes and no. So great to see you and be in conversation with you. I got my master's in mental health at Fordham University. Really enjoyed my time there. And throughout that program, I eventually specialized in career development and continue to do career development in higher education. Really enjoyed that intersection between career and identity and also mental health, and just really found my love for the counseling field um, through the program and through internships and things like that. Also became licensed, was able to do my practicum in the career center and in the counseling center, and so there got a mixture of experiences which allowed me to get my license in mental health in New York, and recently got it as well in New Jersey. So I'm licensed in both states, and yes, have a part-time practice as well that I do, which I enjoy being an entrepreneur and like tapping into that space and really being in both worlds.
Yeah. That's of particular interest to me. And I think that we had talked a little bit earlier about this idea of being in both worlds.
Yep.
And I see that as maybe a place that we could go today and talk
Yeah.
about what it means to be in both worlds, not just in terms of career, but in terms of
hmm
personal identity as well.
hmm
I'm wondering, Fatim, how do you identify yourself or like your social location,
Yeah.
and how does that impact, who you work with or who you would like to work with?
Yeah, definitely. It definitely does. I'm the daughter of West African immigrants from Mali. And I also come from a mixed status family, which is, where some of my family members were documented and some were undocumented. So really that immigrant community, that immigrant culture, but also at that same time, that undocumented experience, right? And having some family members that were and some that weren't. So that upbringing really shaped, how I see the world, what I'm passionate about, and definitely the clients that I want to work with. I remember teaching my mom English in third grade. So as I'm learning and reading books and, sounding out words, she's also learning with me. And it was a fun bonding moment. But now as I'm older, I'm like, oh my God, I was really helping my mom acculturate and adapt to the US. And one thing I really enjoyed about my family is that, because both my parents immigrated to this country and we're the only ones from their family to leave, we really only had each other. It's just me. I have a brother and a sister. So it's really just us five. So it forced us to be like really close. We're really strong. But I also realized at the same time that because of our culture, we really didn't reach out externally to anyone outside of the family, outside of spiritual leaders, outside of friends, for support, right? So that kind of made me a lot more curious about therapy and what is the stigma about, right? Like, why can't we go to a doctor or professional for some help? It actually drew me closer to it because I was like, what is this thing that we can't talk about and can't really explore? It made me more curious. So
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. That's such a familiar thread in,
hmm
certainly in South Asian culture as well, that there's, whatever you want to talk about, we can talk about it here within the confines
yes,
of the family.
yes.
It's our problem, not anybody
hmm
else's.
hmm
We also have the solutions within the
Yes.
community. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to jump in with an observation as we're talking about the different worlds. I too was trained at Fordham in a different
hmm
time. Um,
hmm
And when I dropped myself into the clinical world of working in Manhattan,
Mm-hmm.
I found that people would come to me because they were in some kind of clinical crisis, but often because they were coming from their jobs at their lunch hours and after work.
Right.
We often would be able to resolve some of those issues, but at the crux of what was going on for a lot of people were identity issues.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And often some of the stresses that were causing them to come to me in the first place was because there was a lack of congruence between their I felt identity
Mm-hmm.
and the work that they were doing.
Mm.
Excited to hear more about your discoveries as you've done this work. It's amazing how professionally I come into contact with people who come to this work from
Yes.
different backgrounds and perspectives.
Yes, yes, that definitely. Yeah, I've experienced that myself, and I think that that's what keeps me in the profession and keeps me in the field. And once I realized that there's a need for that, it keeps me motivated to continue to do the work. So yeah.
I'm curious to know how the sense of constantly looking for our own like shifting identities and how that interplay happens with learning this work, and what the
Mm-hmm.
experience has been like. And Fritz, you talked about this is what you encountered as well, and I'm really curious to know. I mean, I think I'm in an ongoing journey
Mm-hmm.
of constantly discovering and unpeeling the layers of my own identity, and they're changing all the time.
Right.
And then how that impacts my work and who I want to work with, what I believe to be true about the self
Mm-hmm.
over time. And I'm wondering what happened for you when you started um, learning therapy when you were in grad school. What worked for you, what didn't work for you, what was something that you were confronting around what was being taught.
Yeah. I mean, I think the first part was even before I even started classes, right? It was just telling family, hey, I'm getting a master's, which, in my household, academic achievement was great and really encouraged. But then when it was like, I'm doing counseling, it's kind of like, what is that? We don't even, in our tribal language, we don't even have a word for our psychologist counselor, right? The closest thing we have is like a spiritual advisor who kind of knows your familial history and kind of can say the trends that happen in your family, but not from like a mental health perspective. And so that right there was, I guess, my first introduction to kind of like, okay, I'm entering this field, but I see how my family, my culture is kind of taking it in. They were very supportive, but I don't think they really understood the journey I was starting. And then once I started the program, I was really excited. I was really excited to be with other people that wanted to dig deeper, wanted to have deep conversations, wanted to help others. I recall like every class, even though it was like really late at night and we were all like maybe working in the day or had personal things going on, still energized and excited. But I quickly realized that the work was also going to be not just learning the theories, but the actual processing with classmates and the self-reflection that came. That really was what stayed with me. And I remember definitely being in the multicultural counseling class and really being excited and being like, this is going to be my favorite class. And it definitely was. And going over like so many different identities, but then quickly realizing that there wasn't anything on intersectional identities, right? And so we would have maybe a class where we talked about women, right? And the women's movement and women's rights. And then we had another class on African American history, kind of, and some of the common themes and challenges of that population. But we didn't have anything on Black women, and I remember just feeling like, like I'm there, I'm seen, but I'm also not seen in this same moment, right? And just really realizing that like the curriculum is one aspect of the training, but that there's so much more that we have to do, that we have to be, that, we've become aware of, even as you're in the training process,
Yeah, yeah. I think it's amazing that you were able to glean that in that moment as it's happening.
Mm-hmm.
that there are so many aspects to this.
Yeah.
Because I think that if I'm honest, it took me significantly longer to wonder about what that feeling was.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, then to have a way to name that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the reasons why I think Sanaa takes us a while to wonder about things is because we're wondering about a whole host of other things.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found in this work that the stuff that I was grappling with and wondering about, the more I do the work and meet new people and then meet new professionals, they kind of help accelerate the learning because they bring a whole new host of things to wonder about.
Mm-hmm.
The thing I was thinking about, you mentioned earlier, there not being a word in your culture,
Mm-hmm.
the language for psychologists. And one of the things I operate with, for me, is as a therapist,
Mm-hmm.
I'm often seeing people who come to me for therapy, but sometimes the work evolves into, eventually evolves into coaching. And
Mm-hmm.
I was asking me how I conceptualize that.
Yeah.
And so I'm actually really curious about how you, now having been educated in an American system,
Mm-hmm.
I see therapy and the deep intrapsychic clinical work we do at the center of a core. And then as the person's symptoms, let's say, ameliorate, we kind of
Mm-hmm.
do sometimes this counseling and consultative work. And then
Mm-hmm.
eventually in coaching, if we're strictly just coaching somebody, what we're doing is connecting them to agency and assets and
Yep.
resources. And
Yep.
we're not necessarily telling the answers, but we're
No.
actually helping them find the answers.
Mm-hmm.
And the people who still need therapy can't
Yep.
make use of the answers the way
Yes.
someone who is adjusted beyond that can. So just wondering how you conceptualize those things in the framework of your culture, but also of what you've learned.
Yeah, I remember being in my coaching program that I did at NYU, and just really realizing that the coaching profession came out of counseling, right? And psychology. And everything I was learning always stemmed back to Carl Rogers and, our early theorists and things like that. And so realizing that it's an extension, like you were saying, of um, the field, and it's just another way of supporting clients. And how I see it is that, there are some clients that need short-term, typically, or kind of goal-oriented support. And I really find that us as therapists, counselors, we have so much good training that can be beneficial to people who want coaching. And for some people, that is their first safe way of exploring therapy, right? They may feel like, you know what, therapy culturally, not sure, but coaching is something I can do. And I think we always have to meet our clients where they're at, right? And so if they want to start there, I think as long as, we are keeping some of those therapeutic components and, empathy, listening, as well as bringing in tools and techniques, that could help them, I think we have a wonderful opportunity to expand our reach, to make it accessible to more people, and to also still specialize, right? And what I love about coaching myself is that I find that there are some times where, I have a client that wants to, talk about, let's say, for example, do I wear my natural hair to this interview or not, right? Is that something I can do, right? And in coaching, I feel like I can share stories. I can talk about a little bit more of my own experience, debating that question before a big interview, and talk it through with them. As a therapist, I would want to process, focus it more on the client. What are their hesitations? What are their maybe past experiences? I can do that plus share a little bit more. So I feel like in coaching, I'm able to be a little creative, wear different hats. I wear I use my therapy techniques, but I also am like looking up articles before my clients come in, right? About like the Crown Act and sharing that with them, And so it's a little bit more active, and I'm getting active now as I'm talking about it, but I find that, it's a good partnership, and definitely if therapists are like interested in that, I think they should definitely speak with other therapists who are also doing coaching and see how they navigate, both worlds.
Mm. It's
Yeah.
really fun to watch you move between those spaces and just
Yeah.
to watch it happen. And as you do that, I'm curious to know, Fatim, what does it feel like for you to wear that coaching hat? And what does it feel like for you to wear the therapist hat? And what does it feel
Yeah.
like inside as a felt experience?
Yeah. Oh, it feels like, different like superpowers almost, I feel like different things I have in my back pocket and toolkit that I can pull out and pull back and decide. I have, in my own work, with my own like supervisors and stuff, have really worked through like which one do I do? And we of course came to the conclusion that you can do more than one, you can do it all. You have multiple interests. And so I think I think it's comfortable for me to be in the middle, and I always find my way back to that experience. But I do really enjoy it, because I feel like I get to see many sides of people. I'm not limiting myself, I'm not pigeonholing myself as well. And um, I think as the profession continues to change and grow and the needs of our clients continue to change and develop, we also have to be comfortable with that too. And I find every time I'm in that kind of, in that in between, I really get to help a client with that too, because I know what it feels like. I know how uncomfortable it can be, how scary it can be, but also how, on the other side of that, is great opportunities, so yeah, it's a journey, but I really do like having both. And I'm grateful that I'm able to speak from both sides and both lens.
Mm.
That is powerful. I'm meditating on that in the moment. And I'm thinking about how for years as a strict purist in the therapy
Hmm.
world, that while that was very rewarding, there were many days where I was completely drained. And part of what I realized is that when you're in the therapist role,
Hmm.
you're processing with clients one after the other, and you don't necessarily get to show up.
Yes.
You have to
Yes.
completely be there for them.
Yeah.
And then when I started doing the coaching, and it's great to us to remind ourselves that the coaching is an extension of our profession.
Yes. Hmm.
Um, but when I started to do that work, I started to light up in the
Yeah.
way that I think Sana was watching you light up as you talked
Hmm.
about it. And I get to share some personal experiences. Every time as a therapist you share personal experiences, you have to do so very strategically.
Yes. Hmm.
You got to make sure that you know your stuff where it ends and where it begins, so that
Yes.
you're not in that moment just sharing your stuff because it feels good for you.
Right. Yep. Hmm.
Whereas in a coaching relationship, it's more of that kind of relationship where you kind of get to try some of that stuff out.
Yeah, yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. And I will say too, just a peek into the coaching world, my classmates, I remember, really needed my voice when it came to ethical stuff and how to refer a client to a therapist when maybe the coaching relationship was going beyond maybe what they felt comfortable with, right? And so I actually think we need to work together and be in that space more so that we can do good by the clients and also use some of our techniques and the things. Our profession has been around a lot longer, so we have kind of systems in place on like how to make ethical decisions and supervision and all of that the coaching profession I think is still newer too and still figuring out, but we can give that insight and say, this is how supervision works for us. This is how we, refer clients out, and this is how we navigate that. And we can also learn from them as well, right? I've learned a lot from them about just, again, that transparency, starting a business, networking, being amongst coaches and therapists and social workers and all the different helping professions. So I think it's really critical that we're in that space.
You mentioned something, Fatim, about how sometimes people might want to come in and they dip their toe into the therapy world um,
Hmm.
through requesting coaching services rather than therapeutic services. And it made me think about some of the clients that I work with. They want to go directly towards the let's do some deep inner work and
Mm-hmm.
resonant. And there are those who might come in and want to solve a discrete problem, and
Mm-hmm.
they might feel more comfortable learning skills.
Mm-hmm.
What can I do to solve this? And that it might feel good to have a relationship that isn't about let's work deeper into your experience right now, but rather they want to have a back and forth about
Mm-hmm.
how do you use this skill? Does it work for you? Does it work for other people? I've had many conversations
Mm-hmm.
with certain clients who want to know, well, they want to ask me about all the other clients I've seen. And if you were to do a poll of all of them,
Oh.
they use this skill, what is the
Mm.
experience like? How many of them are
Yes.
single? How many of them are, how are their relationships? And I think that there's so much to be said for that. Like dropping into that sort of deeper humanity
Yeah.
and meeting your client wherever they are in the process.
Mm-hmm.
And I think us like kind of humbling ourselves, like, do we have to put on this hat right now and
Right.
to insist on deep inner work when in fact,
Mm-hmm.
maybe the deep inner work is our own deep inner work of dropping this
Mm-hmm.
to
Yeah.
do this thing and
Yeah.
to just be with this person.
Yes.
Sure, you want to learn this skill? Let's do it. You want to talk about this? You want a piece of advice?
Yeah.
Do you want to know what my experience has been working with all these people?
Mm-hmm.
And I love that the ability to kind of drop into that.
Yeah.
And that to me feels more spiritual. Like that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay then that there's no language and there's no
Mm-hmm.
coaching because
Yeah.
maybe it's like a spiritual journey for all of us
Yeah.
that we're on together.
Right. Yeah. Definitely. I love that.
Yeah.
I was wondering whether what your thoughts on this, so anybody can answer this, is that our programs, the coaching is an extension. It's a
Mm-hmm.
feel that's an extension of this profession. But we historically have most people getting their coaching training outside their master's programs and their PhD
Mm-hmm.
programs. And should the coaching become an integral part of the graduate training? Should that be something that people walk out with certifications in, as well as they have certifications in other things as they graduate, let's say, from a master's program?
I think so. I think that there's opportunity to, you know, allow clients and counselors in training to specialize and to really think about, what are you interested in and expand, the trainings and opportunities. I really also think about having speakers and having more case studies and people from the field coming in, right? We do a lot of learning, I think, in our program about the past and the history and the theory, but I also think, I was inspired to be in the field by a professor that was practicing and doing career counseling and had his own private practice and was also teaching, and just hearing real life scenarios of like what this looks like in practice. Because when we go out into the field, when we have that first internship or that post-grad opportunity, that's when we're first like, oh, these are all the different things I could do with this degree, or in this field. But then again, we don't always have that connection to the university at that time. Right now we're an
Right.
alum and kind of have moved on, and then we kind of get swept up into the licensing process, right? Which can be really long and difficult. So yeah, I know that there are fantastic like training programs. I'm also certified in Gallup strengths training, which is a great kind of assessment and ways to talk to clients about their strengths. And so, I definitely think there's opportunity to allow us to expand on career counseling, that career counseling class, maybe a coaching class, an executive coaching course, a consulting course. Those were the classes I took in my second master's, and definitely would have been beneficial to have that as well as a counseling student.
Mhm.
I was one of those professors that was practicing and talking about those things when I would go in. I would remind students that at a student level, when
Mm-hmm.
you still have that student ID, A lot of the coaching and training programs will give you a really big discount.
Yeah,
Most of the time, you can't be fully certified until you're done.
right. Yeah.
But my hope is that our professions kind of see the value in getting people while they're still graduate students and letting them know these things exist so that they can
Mm-hmm.
become like you, more people become like you, going out and doing this work. It's there's such a great opportunity for it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I can tell you now, as someone who's coaching C-suite level people and partners in law firms,
Yeah.
coaching every so often, I drop into, can you tell me what feeling is coming up for you?
Mm,
And there's a gleam in their eye, recognizing that no one is asking them those questions.
right. Right.
No one is kind of shifting them into that intrapsychic look, paying attention to what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Mm.
And I think given, everything after the pandemic, right, where folks were, resigning from jobs and really looking internally and needing a coach to kind of talk them through and figure out what maybe their next steps are. I think we just see how important work is to our personal selves, our personal identity, and how important it is that we are comfortable in that space too. And I think coaching is where we can, go into that space and kind of break outside of also some of the barriers and the limitations to access therapy as well.
Fatim, can you say more about how, you're talking about being in private practice
Mm-hmm.
and working with clients and having a particular interest in clients with with an immigrant experience.
Mm-hmm.
Can you say about, what it feels like for you to do coaching in
Mm-hmm.
that space, and how you sort of, you're talking about the hats, but I wonder um, what has been your experience in, like, how does it feel to confidently just use coaching, and what do you feel are the benefits for your clients that are coming in to receive that?
Yeah. I would say, I guess the confidence came over time and just a real um, understanding of like what I can offer and knowing that I have a lot of different tools that I can pull from. And that, at the end of the day, I want to make sure that this client is feeling heard and seen, right? Like that truly is the core, and as long as I'm kind of doing that, the avenue and the methods and tools in which we get there can vary, and I would say that it also depends on the client themselves, where they're at, and what they want to focus on. I've had, some consultation calls where, they start off with coaching, but then they also slip that they're interested in therapy, but they're not sure. It's so interesting. Sometimes clients come to me not knowing what I can offer too, right? I'm like, I think you're a coach, I think you're a therapist too, and we kind of talk through what, would be a best fit for them, the strengths of both, the limitations of both, right? Just really being clear on what that is, but that of course I am, I'm going to use all of me when I'm working with you, right? At the crux of it, I'm a therapist who has like this type of style, who is not going to lead you, is not going to tell you what to do, who's going to collaborate with you, who has a multicultural lens, and kind of like educating them on who the style I have. And I find that people first pick that, and then we figure out which method works best for them, depending on time constraints, right? Financial needs right now, the topic at hand, what they want to focus on. And if that ever changes, if a client is ever like, hey, we're doing coaching, but I'm kind of curious about this therapy side, we have a conversation about what that transition would look like, if at all.
Mm.
It's such an important thing to recognize. But what when you were talking, I was thinking about how important it is for you, how it is important for each of us to be doing this self work ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
so that we know what we are and what we
Mm-hmm.
bring,
Yes.
so that if the situation needs it, we can pivot.
Yeah.
I often also explore why people have picked me,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
what they think they were getting,
Mm-hmm.
what were they expecting. Sometimes it's random and it wasn't a me pick. It was I'm just picking a coach or I'm picking a therapist.
Yeah.
Um, but
Yeah.
it is so important for us to have an understanding, a general understanding of that stuff.
Absolutely. And that part has always been really interesting. For sometimes I've had immigrant clients, really get excited, right? And happy to see a little bit of themselves reflected in me, when they see my profile or my bio and they're like, oh my gosh, you have a similar identity to me and you're a therapist. I can have kind of
Mm.
both of my needs in one, but then also a little bit of curiosity about like, well, how did you kind of get into this field? You were talking about that a little bit, Sana, right? Of like, how did you navigate breaking that barrier or that stigma that we have in the community about being a therapist? And it becomes a little bit of a curiosity about how I even got to the profession. And those are really, interesting conversations. And I think that's where we have to decide, how much am I going to disclose? How much am I going to process this? But for me, I'm always motivated by a quote that my old supervisor told me, which was, like a statistic about like the number of like Black psychologists and psychologists and psychiatrists that are out there, right? Like that it's less than 2%, less than 4%. And so anytime I'm kind of like struggling with like, how do I navigate this? I always try to remember that this is really rare. My identity, my profession is really rare and that like I'm needed in this field and I got to keep breaking those barriers, for myself and others. So
Let's talk about this. We don't often talk about it.
yeah.
And I don't readily have the statistics for, South Asian therapists, but it's
Mhm.
a, small number, but it's a growing number,
Mm.
right? And I think that uh it's there's uh we learn so much and we're learning, and we have a very Western lens in
Mhm.
terms of what we're learning in school. And yet we also have this wonderful opportunity to add to what we're learning in all
Mhm.
different ways, and
Mhm.
that, taking on coaching and having other colleagues. And we also have opportunity to have these conversations about what it feels like. What does it feel like to go and find your own therapist or your own coach?
Mhm.
Feel like to have conversations, difficult conversations, possibly with colleagues. What happens when you go in for supervision or a peer consult, and there's different expectations for what you should do in your case, but you feel differently because maybe there's more of like a cultural allegiance,
Oh,
or
right. Yep.
you know, um, and so I'm curious about what's happened for you in that way as you've grown and like explored your own identity, and worked with people who might share some aspects of your identity.
Mhm. Yeah. I'd say supervision has been really, really powerful. I owe my style, my approach, the way I navigate client conversations, all to like my supervisor who trained me and really was also an advocate for me, but also really build me up. And I know that that's also really rare, to have some folks, I remember from the program and also just in the field, they go to a supervisor and it's just check the box and give me my hours and we're done. It's very transactional, and I feel like I really learned a lot about myself and my barriers, and also I had my supervisor was a woman of color, and she really helped me understand that the things I was experiencing as a therapist in training were likely things I was already experiencing in the workplace, in class, right? microaggressions, not feeling, am I on the right path? Am I doing this? Am I doing it how I'm supposed to do it? When it's like, who is that coming from? Where is those messages coming
Right.
from?
Yeah.
She had similar experiences to me in terms of this cultural demands and cultural expectations, but then also being in the therapy field and what we're supposed to do. And she really used the sessions as a way to just break it down. So it's like, well, do you really? What do you want? What are you thinking? And really gave me that space to process, just the field as a whole, how I felt about it, about going into that.
Yeah.
And just being aware of what I'm loving, what I'm struggling with, what I'm not, comfortable, where I'm not comfortable going, why I like this therapeutic style as opposed to the other, was really safe. And I think was what I needed. And so, I think it was just that space that gave me the place to kind of really look into that, think about that. And I really feel like for anyone who's either, seeking a supervisor or seeking a therapist, again, it goes back to that relationship. It wasn't the fact that, she was a psychologist or, the client she saw. It was all about, our connection, our
Oh,
relationship,
yeah.
and their willingness to really advocate for me, invest in me, want to do the work with me.
Mm.
Um, and really encourage me. So that can be really hard to find, but I wouldn't give up. I would keep going, until you find that good fit, if possible.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I never say I'm jealous, but I wish I had the vision that you had. And I
Yeah.
recall having positive feelings about my supervisors. We could play with that word another podcast. Um, I don't like words that have hierarchies like that. But nonetheless, I had great supervisors that did a lot of teaching and helped me learn this profession.
Mm-hmm.
But what I've realized, and I realized this when I would enter different institutions as the first person of
Mm-hmm.
color
Mm-hmm.
professor
Mm-hmm.
that people have had before,
Mm-hmm.
how rare it was to have that kind of role in supervision. I've been a supervisor for about 15 years,
Yeah.
and but I never had a supervisor that was anything other than majority Caucasian culture.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So there was never any of that work of the relationship between self identity
Mm.
and how that intersects with this work.
Right.
Um, and I think that that is so important, which is why part of why I do this work with Sana is that we talk about this stuff. We do
Right.
it. This is like peers supervision, which I call
Yeah.
supervision. For me, supervision is a therapy for the therapist.
Yes.
And it's a
Mm-hmm.
therapeutic interaction and it's
Right.
a therapeutic relationship.
Yeah.
So part of even this podcast, my hope is that someone listening will get some of that, even with just what you just shared. Just what
Mm-hmm.
you shared is like an awakening to, oh wow, if I could choose a supervisor, could I choose a
Mm-hmm.
supervisor that I could identify with, that could identify with my experience and could do that work with me, not just
Mm-hmm.
making sure I did clinically the right thing,
Right.
but it's
Mm-hmm.
asking the right questions around identity, this
Mm.
identity in this skin
Yes.
in relation to the work.
Yeah.
Whew, I'm getting emotional.
I know. Yeah.
I love that we started out talking about people seeking out therapy or coaching because of the felt sense of incongruence,
Mm-hmm.
and that we're landing in a place of, well, is it safe enough to be yourself? Find a
Mm-hmm.
place that's safe enough to be yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the message, and right, and that the personal is professional, right, and the professional is personal, right. We really can't separate, and so I feel like each space that I've talked about, I've either encouraged people to bring those together or have been able to do that for myself with someone else. and they've modeled that for me. So it's comfortable for me to do it for other people. But that's really always what I'm trying to get at. And I hope that, as counselors and trainings or future supervisors or clinicians and therapists, that, we always kind of keep that in mind.
Fatim, thank you so much for coming on here and sharing, sort of being comfortable being in the middle, all together
Yes.
in this space.
Yeah.
I really hope that we can do this again soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you both so much. Love this conversation and so looking forward to chatting more about this.
Thank you.